to press record on here. And so good evening, everybody. This is Wisdom Entrepreneurs on Monday, the 8th of March, 2021. And this evening we have the wonderful double act of Chris and Wendy. And what did you title this show, ladies? What did you call it?
I came up with it. No, what was it? Was it an open conversation about bereavement and grief, I think.
Perfect title, yes. So that is what it's called, even though it's named wrong on the live stream. So would you like me to read the missing link before you start? Yeah. Okay.
Would you like that, Chris? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Would you like it, Wendy? Because there's only one nod.
Yes,
so.
please.
Oh, okay.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Randomly, as we do, I'm going to. Hello, Debbie. So if you would like to get grounded for a minute and just bring ourselves to this nice, safe space, if it's comfortable for you, put your feet on the ground and your hands in your lap. And lower your gaze or close your eyes. And take a few loving, deep breaths in and out. And allow yourself the gift of leaving everything that's occurred so far at the door and being present in this safe space of unconditional love. I'm going to read a couple of pages from the chapter called Love and Forgiveness from The Missing Link by Sydney Banks. Love and understanding harmonize the mind of humanity to its true inner nature. What you give in life is what you receive. To give love is to receive love. A mind full of love and good feelings can never go wrong. Love and forgiveness go hand in hand. Without them, life is encumbered by ill feelings and unhappiness. Judging your own faults or the faults of others leads to unhappiness. A mind that dwells in non-judgment is a contented mind. A heart full of love is void of all judgment and is filled with divine spirit. My love is like a red, red rose. Its fragrance fills the air. It guides me to a place of light instead of dark despair. Forgiveness is divine and has a wonderful effect on our lives. So take a nice deep breath in and out while those words wash over us. And bring yourself back into the room when you're ready. And I'll hand over to Chris and Wendy.
Thank you.
I think, Chris, you'd like to start with something? Was it some thoughts or a poem? Okay, if you're happy.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own experience of grief and bereavement. I think you know from the introduction that I lost my husband about 3 years ago. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about that and how I experienced that. My husband Steve, we met when we were both 18, and so we knew each other very well. We were we were best friends. We didn't actually get together as a couple until we were in our late 30s. So we'd known each other for 20 years really before we got together. And for me, it felt just like coming home. It was like, you know, being married to your best friend. It was beautiful. And we talked a lot. I mean, we had difficulties, as all people do at the beginning, but we talked a lot, and we knew each other quite, you know, obviously well before we were in a relationship. So we knew where we came from, both of us, really. And Steve was very understanding about all my explorations, all my spiritual explorations, all the different things I did. And he was much more interested in sort of, you know, quantum physics and that sort of thing. And so we met in the middle. We sort of, we realized, I think energy was our bit where we met, in the middle of both of those things. And so I suppose my greatest fear was losing him. It was a big thing for him, for me, that I might lose him. And his greatest fear, I think, was losing his mind, his mental health, because he had some issues with that in the past, and it was something I knew that preyed on his mind. And he had, before we knew what was wrong with him, there was quite a while where he was going for various tests and we didn't know quite what it was. And it was, to me, it felt like he was depressed. That's how I saw it, as a depression. And he became a bit sort of almost like he was lost to me. There wasn't communication wasn't there, and it was like he'd gone into a little world of his own. And when he was finally diagnosed, he had lung cancer. It had already spread to his brain and to his bones. So that's why he was basically not himself. And that was, I mean, it was difficult for both of us, but it was, you know, it was difficult for me because we'd had such a close relationship. But after we got the diagnosis, the sort of amazing thing happened. We'd not long moved house. We'd only moved house a few months before he was diagnosed. And we had enough room in the house for people to come and stay. And people just turned up. So where we met at college, it was a very small college, and we were all very closely connected. So people from college days just turned up. His brother and family turned up, you know, various people, and came, and my friends, and helped me to look after him at home. And there's something about being in a building or living with someone who you know is dying. I mean, he was only given months to live when he got the diagnosis, and it gets rid of all the masks. Everything drops away for people, and the conversations we had were just amazing, because there was no pretense really. And it was interesting. I only realized when I was thinking about this the other day that I was talking to people a lot about the principles and this understanding, and I've been around it for quite a while, and it hadn't dawned on me why it was so much in the forefront of my mind at this time. And it was because it was only a few months before that I'd visited Onley Prison and actually probably seen Derek. I don't know, I'm not sure if he was there that day. And so I was so impacted by that day. It was just amazing seeing all and seeing the transformation. And so it was obviously very close to me in that time, and I was telling people about it. And there were various things during that time that I think having that understanding and made it so much easier for me in a way. I think there's a lovely friend of mine and Steve's one of Steve's best friends, who came. He wasn't working either, and he just came and stayed. He didn't stay in the house because he knew it'd be a bit much for me, because he's quite larger than life. So he stayed in a hotel, and everywhere we had to go, any hospital appointments, he drove us, and he sat with Steve, and he was there all the time. But he's very much a person who likes to be in control. He was a CEO of a company. He likes to plan. He likes to have spreadsheets. He gets everything sorted. And so he would go away in the evening and read up about all the things that were likely to happen to Steve in the next, you know, as he got sicker and sicker. And in the end, I had to say to him, look, just, I'm really glad you're doing it. It's great. And if there's something I really need to do, tell me. But otherwise, I don't want to know, because I can cope with things as they happen. But, you know, I don't want to know about all these other things that might happen. And as it turned out, most of them never did happen. So I had been wasting energy there. But I knew that I could cope if I coped with things a day at a time, but not too much of the planning ahead. And there were a couple of things that happened. It was interesting with Steve because he would be quite grumpy, and you know, it got a bit better when they put him on steroids, but he wasn't really himself. But he would, if he had visitors, and he had a lot of visitors, he would sort of act really. It was almost like there was nothing wrong with him, and he'd have conversations and things. And then he wouldn't be like that with me. He wouldn't be. And I was a bit annoyed about this at the beginning. And then I thought, oh, I'm the person he can do that with. You know, he still feels he's got to pretend for these people, but he can do that with me. And so it sort of softened me. And I was like, oh, okay. And there was another time where he said to me, Steve said to me, you always seem to be angry with me. And I was like, and I realized that most of the time I was spending with him at that point was trying to get him to eat or to take medication or whatever. So I'd go in and he wouldn't want to do any of these things. And so I'd be trying to get him to do them. And then I suddenly realized that that's why he was seeing me as always being angry with him. So I realized that I just needed to go and offer him whatever it was. And if he said, yes, that was great. And if he didn't, I'd go away and come back again in half an hour, and he'd probably have forgotten he'd said no the first time. So he'd agree to it, but it lessened it. And I made sure that I spent time with him when I was just being with him and just, sort of lying in the bed with him and not speaking really, just being. And I was sort of communicating with him directly, soul to soul, I felt, rather than through the sort of headspace. There was like that connection that I got. And there was a lovely time when when he was still getting up, I was sitting with him on the sofa, and I just said, how can I help you? What can I do to help? And he just looked at me and said, just be. And I thought, oh, wow, that's so wonderful. And so, yeah. There was one other thing when I was, sometimes people, my friends would chuck me out of the house because they knew I needed some time out and I'd got to be on my own. And I remember walking back home and getting into my head completely about what it was going to be like when I was a widow and I'll be all on my own and I'll be doing all these things on my own. And I suddenly caught myself, that's not happened yet. Steve's still at home. You can go home and sit with him. He's still there. But I was way ahead of myself in that. And so I was just looking at that. And when he died, I got a really strong sense that this wasn't the end of the story, of our story together. It was a really strong feeling of that. And as I was, sort of coping with the grief, I realized that if I wanted to be sad, if I felt sad, the best thing was to just go with it. And if I did that and, cried or whatever, then it passed much quicker. Whereas if I got into it shouldn't be like this, or I shouldn't, whatever, then I got stuck for much longer. And I noticed as well that most of the time when I got really full of grief, it was when I was thinking, this shouldn't be like this. We've just moved into a new house. You should have been able to enjoy it. There's, there were all these things should have been happening. And that when I got stuck into those, I realized that's when I suffered the most, when I was stuck in that. what was interesting as well about the people that were at the house is the transformations in some of them. You know, one of my best friends was there a lot of the time, and she actually changed her job completely. She became a funeral celebrant, and she did sort of say that that was to do with that experience that she'd had. And also my brother-in-law, I think actually Mama Jane met him at a Three Principles conference, and he was the last person I thought would be interested in anything like this. So that was really interesting that there was things came out of that time. And I came across the phrase, I'm not sure if I've shared it in the group, but well, there's a film called Collateral Beauty. And I just loved that phrase because there was beauty that came out of this situation. It was horrible, and it was, you know, and I still have flashbacks to some of the more awful bits of it, but there was a beauty in that period as well. And one of the things I noticed as well, one of those really, when you sort of think, oh gosh, did I really think that? You know, and when you think, someone who's just lost someone, I can't talk about that person to them because otherwise they'll remember and they'll get upset. And I was thinking how ludicrous that is, because if you've lost someone that close, they're only ever one thought away at the most. And you're not going to remind somebody, they're already there in your head. So, and actually talking about him, and particularly when people appreciated him, because he was an amazing guy, was when that really helped me, when people were sort of, would talk about him. And in fact, it was interesting because I hadn't shared much on social media about his death or anything, because he was quite a private person in that sense, and so I didn't want to do it. But there was one time where I just felt the need to do something. I think it was, I can't remember whether it was his birthday or Valentine's Day or something, and I shared something, and the outpouring of comments of people who'd wanted to say something, but I hadn't given them the opportunity. And I suddenly realized I wasn't the only one grieving. There were lots of other people grieving. And so I hadn't given them that opportunity. And so that was a sort of learning for me that people needed that too. And I think the other thing that I found was, because he was so not himself towards the end, and you know, difficult, well, you can imagine it, just where he just wasn't functioning properly towards the end. And it takes a while to move from remembering somebody like that to remembering them how they really were. And it's only in the last year or so that that's starting to become more of the memories than the memories of that last year. And that's lovely when that comes back, and I get nice memories of you know, how we were together, rather than some of the sadder ones. And I had an insight actually just only a couple of weeks ago, where I realized there's one of the stages of grief that people talk about is the anger and the irritation, and boy did I feel that at times. And it was really interesting because I knew I would be in a situation. Oh, I remember once a year or so afterwards, I was at a festival, and there was a queue for the loo, and people were in the way, and I was so frustrated with all these people. And so it's really obvious then that that's not what's causing me to be irritated. It was, you know, it's that sort of process of grief. And it was only when I knew that at the time, but I think I came across somebody saying, you know, that your things that happen outside you can't bruise your true self. They can't harm your true self, but they can damage they can bruise your ego or your personality. And that actually a lot of the time when I was that anger that I thought was just a natural anger from having lost Steve was actually part of that. It shouldn't be like this. This shouldn't have happened to me. I should still be with my husband. And so that was it was quite interesting to see that in a slightly different light. Anyway, I think that's probably enough from me. Wendy would like to take it.
Yeah, when you were talking about anger there, you know, because obviously there's different, everybody feels grief differently, just like they do pain. And I think what I've become, well, I am aware of because it affected me. I've lost a few family members, and one was because of COVID and during COVID, and I felt anger there because I couldn't be at their hospital bedside. Now, when all my family have been, you know, in their last days of life and been in hospital, I've been at their bedside. I'm from a big family, and that's what we do. We congregate, and we tend to annoy the hospital because I've got lots of brothers and sisters, and usually there's around 20 of us cramming into a room. But I did feel extreme anger because I couldn't get to be with her. So I really had to kind of accept that. And I do feel, yeah, for a lot of people, they haven't had that time to be at someone's bedside because of COVID, which creates very different emotions. Before COVID, we could be there, you know, and for so many people, they haven't been able to. And then the other awful thing is funerals, you know. With my sister, we could, you know, all of the family couldn't be there. So that creates another thing, you know, with someone's passing being difficult as it is. I mean, I had different family members pass, and we all have individual feelings to different family members. We're all close. With my dad, it was an acceptance. With my mum, I felt great pain. We were all at her bedside. I spent the last 5 days with her, with my family, and we reminisced, and we got past the pain, and we told stories from the past, like she was there hearing it all, and it was a lovely experience. And because I came across Sid Banks' wonderful understanding about 20 months ago, with my sister, there was a difference. I did feel anger, and when I got past that, I was very fortunate in that I was able to be at her bedside. And so I was there at her passing, and I felt once I knew that she wasn't going to survive, I felt an acceptance and a peace. And when she did pass, I remember looking out the window, feeling very grateful for the life that I had, and for everything I have in my life. And I knew that I would be okay. I just knew I would be okay. So, and I knew that I would grieve. I knew it would go. I knew there'd be days I would cry. I knew that would happen. And I'm also quite comfortable to say to people, you know, I'm just, you know, I'm really feeling sad today, or I'm not. Grief is different. We get conditioned how we should act with grief from young. This is what we should be like. This is what we do. And sometimes that can be quite a Victorian thing. And then there's differences culturally, you know, how people are told they need to react to grief. I mean, in this country, it's quite common that children don't go to funerals, you know, and there's a big question there. Is that right? Is that wrong? Because children can suffer because they sometimes don't get closure. So they can, and with children, I think we can think that they're coping okay because they may not be showing it. Or the fact with kids, they do something that's called puddle jumping, where they're okay 1 minute and then not the next. And so we can just view them as coping fine. I don't know, there's that question in my mind, are we always right? I don't know the answer to keep them away from sad occasions. And it does depend on a funeral, whether it's you know, a really sad occasion or whether it's a celebration. With my mum's passing, there was something good that came after it. And it was a very sad ending, which I'm not going to go into, don't need to. So all the family were there, and we had her funeral and we had the wake afterwards. And I had this thought, and this is before I came across this understanding. And I went round to my brothers and sisters and said, look, you know, we used to always get together at lots of parties, lots of family parties and weddings and that. I said, now there are more funerals than weddings. So I had this suggestion, how about we get together once a year at a caravan site, which is something we always used to do when we were kids as a family. And I started that ball rolling. So the first one, there were 19 family members. The second one, there were almost 30. We couldn't have it last year. So out of something sad came something very beautiful, of my brothers and sisters, my nieces and nephews, cousins getting together, cousins meeting who couldn't remember each other. And I remember observing a group of cousins sitting together. It was sunny outside. And my son came over to me after, and he was 21 at the time. And he said, Mum, you know, I've just really bonded with some relatives that I hadn't really known before. And they were actually talking about feelings and anxiety. And it was such a supportive thing. So, you know, I'd be interested to know if anybody had anything that was positive that came out of someone's passing.
We have a question from Wilson.
Hey guys,
Or
sorry, I'm in a
comment.
camera right now, so I'm gonna be off camera. Don't want to distract you, one thing I really just wanted to say, that one thing I noticed about that the sad emotion when you're upset and you miss somebody or you miss something, is very powerful, very, very powerful. Because my friend, he died quite a while ago, and about 5-6 years ago, I missed his birthday, and I found out on the day that it was his birthday. And I was so upset because I thought I should have known that. I should have known his birthday. And I was in tears, I was crying. And it's only until kind of recent I realized that I kind of put that on myself. Even though it's very hard it was very hard at the time to just see it like that. But I always thought if I didn't remember that person, or I was happy on that day that they passed, or I always thought that made me a bad person. So then I would kind of beat myself up and be that bad person and shy away from that and just be under the weather, and because it kind of felt right, if that made sense. And the way I see it is that, oh wow, like I remember him in a very good light, and I kind of live my life to that. So I know sometimes we're just human, you know, we forget things and we do certain things, and then we remember, but then that's not a bad thing. Sorry, I'll just say that because for me, that was really tough, man. I used to beat myself up a lot. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
I'll add to that as well. When the last death I dealt with was my sister's from COVID, and there was sadness. She had to shield not to get COVID and ended up getting it anyway and passing. But prior to that, her husband had just passed before COVID, and she had to shield. And she was a very bubbly, outgoing person, and she was the organizer in the family. And this strong character had to lock herself away while also grieving her husband. And it had a really detrimental effect in that she lost a lot of weight, and that actually ended up making her ill. And she passed. And I know that she felt, I could see the feelings that she was going through. One, that she was, I think she it was just how she was feeling about her husband's passing. I know she felt guilt, even though she did so much for him. I think she, obviously being locked away wasn't a good thing because of shielding. And I think something that a lot of people do struggle with, when a loved one passes and they're on their own, it's that there's the acceptance of it, which will take as long as it takes, and then there's getting used to change in your life. I think there's a fear for some of change. Life isn't going to be the same again, particularly if it's a partner or a child, and obviously it's a process which, you know, I respect is individual to everybody, but it's getting used to that change, accepting that change, and in time, like this understanding, you just see a little, hopefully a glimmer of light. Unfortunately, my sister didn't see that. She was locked in her thinking, in her sadness. But obviously we're resilient people, because look how many people just again and again go through grief. And there's also the grief that I had a thought then when you were talking. Grief comes with losses, but it doesn't have to be someone's dying. You know, you can have losses in your life where you experience a kind of grief. You know, it could be job losses, it could be friendship losses, a friend moves away. So you can still grieve, and it doesn't have to be a death.
I'm glad. Sorry, Wilson, carry on.
Sorry, Mama J. That just leads to that was beautiful, because it leads exactly to what I'm gonna say now, which is I'm still, even though I see that like that, I'm still kind of going through a bit of it with a little light at the end. And that's the only way I can explain it. Because of course I got two granddads, but I don't know them. I've never really known my granddad, so I've never really had a granddad like that. And I used to live in Dagenham a while ago. And there was this guy that lived up the road from me, old guy, and his nephew lived there. I knew his nephew, but his nephew didn't really want to help him, and his wife was always moaning at him and stuff. So it's like I always helped him, always. So every day he used to come knock for me. We used to fix his bike, and we developed this relationship where I would help him. I would ride to the pub with him, have a little drink with him, and he was a really friendly guy, but he was like extremely racist, but funny racist. And the funniest thing about it was, when he was doing these things to these people, these little racist jokes and stuff, he was mixed race, he was from the Caribbean. And when he's saying these racist jokes, I felt awkward, but the person that he was speaking to, him and them are laughing. And obviously I went to prison, and while I was in prison, he died. So I never really got communication with him. I never really spoke to him much. And it still kind of burns me to this day, if that makes sense. It burns me to this day, because he was actually like my granddad. We used to call him Chicken George. Everybody called him Chicken George. And yeah, I still, when I think about him and I think about it, I still kind of struggle with that, because it's like, I felt like I just disappeared off the face of the earth, if that makes sense. Because he didn't know what I was into. He didn't know I was on the road selling drugs or anything like that. He just saw the good in me, and I used to help him, and we used to have a laugh every day. And yeah, when he passed, I heard about it in prison, and it was just horrible, because I just didn't, all the thoughts ran through my head. Who was there with him? Who helped him? What was the funeral like? And it still runs through my head now, but I know there's the little light just tells me, when my brain's getting a bit overloaded, that little light comes on, where I just, you know, I step back from that, because I know I'm just overloading my thoughts with a load of things I'm creating, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Can I jump in, Wendy, as well, and
Yes,
Chris?
yep, mm-hmm.
So I really love what you've been sharing, all three of you, all the stories and the different things. And what I really heard is it's so interesting because I heard, wow, so grief, and it doesn't have to be from somebody passing, it can be from other things, even grief from, like, I don't have contact with my sister and her children, and I have a lot of grief about that. Grief is like all of the emotions and feelings, part of the human experience. And I really, really heard that when you were talking, because I kept hearing that as like, oh, so for instance, Wendy, you touched on different cultures deal with things differently, and therefore there are no stages, because a different culture might not have those stages, they might have different stages. And I kept hearing that and kept hearing that. And then what happened was, I thought, I can't say that. I can't say that about grief. That, that might be disrespectful. And so I really got to see almost the point of why you're having this conversation, and the point of why Bron's doing what Bron is doing, is that we've got this made up idea that it's some sacrosanct feeling that is different from everything else that we can't talk about. And so we carry it around in a different way and don't want to tread on anybody's toes. And I thought that was just so interesting to see that in the moment, my dichotomy of, oh, shall I mention that? Because will that be disrespectful? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and there'll be other cultures that treat it quite differently.
Yes.
That's the British way, and some other cultures. But yeah, it's just a loss is a loss. We can't put a measure on someone else's loss and how they feel it.
Yeah, and it all still comes down to, doesn't it, the way that we operate, how we operate will impact that, not a set of circumstances. And you said something like your sister was like trapped in her mind. Yeah,
she was. Yeah,
she was trapped in there.
Deep grief.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts. I'd love to give other people space if they've got something to share. I think Alfie.
Yeah, I wanted to share that a few years ago, our little nephew, 3-year-old nephew, died of cancer. And, so we've been going backwards and forwards and, through the sort of process of this. But then it came to the point where it's like, this is it sort of thing. So we would kind of go over and just be in the house and kind of, with my sister-in-law and everything to sort of, just go through however it was going to be. And so we kind of got the sleeper down to London and got off the train in the morning, and I had the most immense panic attack on the platform. It was like, oh my God, all this is really real. This is real now, kind of. And but it was almost as if all the fear was squeezed out of me in that moment. And when we got there, nothing prepared me for the kind of sacredness of the space that we were going to be in, with these like sort of there were 7 of us. And so, when you said that, Christina, it's like, yeah, there's all the other stuff, but it's such a deep space of, there's such a presence of love, or something so tangible that somehow you get close to in a way that I had never experienced before. And that feeling was so strong. It's like he left me with this amazing gift or something, to just have experienced that space of love or something. And prior to that, I hadn't seen somebody die or been with somebody who was dead or something, and it was like, wow, this 3-year-old just taught me so much or something. And so, yeah, when you said, is there a positive that's been left from a death? That is just such a sacred kind of gift that I got from that experience. And it's hard to sort of express that, like you were saying, Mama J, without the feeling like, so I'm not disrespecting all the sad side of it, but it's like, wow, that which we are just stays forever. And it, yeah.
Yeah, I think I it's interesting you use the word gift, because I've called it that, you know, that Steve gave us a gift because he brought us together and he allowed us to have that space. And yeah, I can see it like that too. I can see it like that too. And it's almost like, I know what Jacqueline was saying, that you can only say these things. There's all sort of like rules somehow that you can only say these things when you've suffered a loss. And that if anybody else says them, and what that does is it makes people afraid of talking to you. And so I don't know if it's the same for you, Wendy, but I seem to find myself in a lot of times making it comfortable for other people to talk about it, and comfortable for people to talk about Steve. So I would always talk about him in a very, you know, upbeat way, and remember him and bring him into the conversation so that other people didn't have to worry about doing it. And I also found that there's a different level of conversation that you have with other widows. It's almost like there's a little widows club that you don't belong to until you are one, and then you have these conversations. Because I had a friend who lost her husband some years before, and I talked to her about it a little bit, but I never talked to her in the depth that I did after Steve died. And it was like it was almost okay to talk to me about it now because I'd experienced it too. And I think with that's where the fear comes, isn't it? That I'm not qualified to talk about this because I haven't experienced it. But in a way, that makes it more difficult for people who are going through it to talk about it, because they can sense that, you know, that's that sort of fear or reluctance not to get it wrong. You know, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to get it wrong, you know, and yeah, I think it's better to talk about it and maybe get it wrong than it is to.
Yeah, I think the thing there is some people will be comfortable talking about it and some not. And I don't know, is the thing to be honest, you know, like you said, and say, look, I'm comfortable talking about my bereavement to people so that they know. I mean, I guess as a society, we do need to talk about it more. You know, it's that taboo subject, or it's on. But you know, like with anything, a divorce, you can say, I'm fine talking about it, whatever it is, or I'm not comfortable talking about it. You know, in fact, after my sister passed, I went into work and I said, we had a meeting. I said, look, I'm okay. I just don't want to talk about it. And that was that then. And then a month later, I said, I'm all right now. You can ask. But then, you know, but yeah, I just needed to say. So I guess it's being honest and not being afraid to be honest, because we're all individual. Yeah,
that's true. Actually, I hadn't seen it from that side. But yeah, some people don't want to until they're ready. But
yeah,
I think allowing it if they want is very powerful and very
certainly allowing people to talk if they need to,
or cry.
Yeah.
It's okay if people cry or suddenly break down, or of course, you know, that's part of it as well, isn't it? Our dear friend Danny died 18 months ago from cancer, and it's, you know, we always used to say poor Danny, because Jane, she's my best friend, and she gave Danny a hard time when we used to go poor Danny. And he was a miracle, because he was diagnosed with a terminal cancer 6 years previously and had 4 months left to live, and then 6 years on, you know, he'd built a house and done all of these amazing things, and so he was like a miracle. So she was she kept saying, I'd rather have had that time with him than not had him in my life. So the fact that he's gone now, but she experienced the same, and all that sort of can she mention it, should she mention it, she doesn't want other people to feel embarrassed by it, sometimes she's upset, sometimes she's closed down, etc. And what I really saw with her was, it's okay whatever you're feeling, it's all okay. And sometimes you will feel angry, and sometimes you will feel these things, sometimes you will just not even want anybody to mention it. But we don't have to pussyfoot around. You can just say, I'm not okay with that right now. Could we change the subject? And I think it's that, isn't it? Being okay, not being okay as well. And I grieved for him. I felt really sad and grieved for him and cried and missed him and wanted to be asked about him as well, and wanted to talk about him and tell stories and laugh about him. But I was experiencing a different grief from Jane, who of course was experiencing a lot of, this was her second husband who died from cancer, and is she going to be on her own forever, and all of those feelings as well. So I really appreciate what you're talking about, bringing it out. I wanted to just mention something else though, which is, what about when, because my father died, and I talk about the gift that he left me, because he couldn't be a good father to me in the form. So the gift he left me was he was an amazing father in the spirit, and I saw that. But when both my parents died, when both of them died, there was such a lot of angst in our relationship that it wasn't a smooth just grieving because my parent died that I dearly loved. There was grieving still though, but there was also resentment and anger and guilt because I felt all of that, and lots of other emotions came up as well. And I just wanted to throw that out there, that it's not always, someone dearly beloved, is it, that passes. It's sometimes it comes with a load of other stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting you saying that, how you could have had a bereavement, it could have been a long time ago, and then something brings that all back to now. And you know what struck me? You remember when Princess Diana died, there was a lot of public, they appeared to be grieving. So the emotion of her death, and then obviously it was all out in the public on TV, it brought back, I remember watching the TV and seeing a lot of people looked like they were grieving. I don't know if they were grieving for her or grieving. I think some of them it brought back memories of, someone they had lost, which, was really interesting. So I guess, you could be, it's interesting. You could have someone who suffers a bereavement, and it suddenly brings you back to where you were in your own loss. An interesting one.
And I think also that what you were saying about not, when it's someone that you've got a complicated relationship with, that's in a way, that's why I told the background at the beginning, because I wanted to make it, that experience was, predicated on it being a relationship that had been a good relationship. But yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of other feelings that come up when you do stuff, but it's an unresolved thing. Yeah.
I'll tell you what just suddenly came to me as well. So when parents separate or divorce, the children, do they experience a kind of grief? Because this person who lived in the house with them isn't there. They're still out there, but it's almost like a grief, isn't it? My life isn't normal. I've lost this person who was there.
Yeah.
It comes in so many ways, so many ways.
I think also it depends on what you think happens when someone dies.
Yes.
If you really think that this is all there is and there's nothing else, then gosh, I wouldn't have been having the same experience that I had. That would have been a completely different experience. because I felt him around me for quite some time, and there were, things that happened that was like, yeah, okay. So I think, and I had that feeling of it not being the end of the story, that there was something else, that wasn't the last time we would have connection. But no, I can't begin to imagine what it would be like if you didn't have that.
Yeah. Girls, you have Rob and Lorraine with comments. Rob first.
I just thank you so much for this. I found this really, really useful, and I had an insight while I was listening. I mean, I suffered a bereavement as well, and what the insight that I've had while I was listening is that my bereavement started while this person was still alive, because I lost the person that was, and my bereavement, my sadness really came from what happened, who that person then became. Makes sense. So when the actual death came, it didn't feel like what I would expect to be feeling, because I think I'd already gone through a long period of bereavement. So what I found really helpful about that was just that idea that there is no right or wrong way to do this. And also that it can start much, much earlier than the passing of the person.
Yeah.
You can grieve a relationship, and you can grieve for the person that was.
Beautiful. Mm. Mm.
Hi, thank you. This is marvellous, absolutely marvellous, and yeah, it's prompted lots of things to come up for me, and one of them, talking to Wendy's comment about children and is it right to go to the funeral or not go to the funeral. I lived in Malta, and my stepdad died in a diving accident, and I was 8 years old, and I remember being pulled out of school one day and told, say goodbye to your friends because you're going back to England. And I remember feeling like so embarrassed, being pulled out and not knowing what was happening. And what I remember of that time was my mum was in bits crying, my brother was crying, but nobody told me what had happened because they wanted to protect me. I know I was the youngest and they wanted to protect me, but I was so bewildered by the whole thing. And I just remember thinking, oh, everyone's upset. I'll just be nice to everyone and sit in the corner and play with my doll. And, and then my granddad, I heard that my granddad was coming over to fetch us back to England. And I remember singing this song, Grandad, Grandad, we love you, and all that. I didn't understand anything why everybody was upset. And my stepdad, I absolutely adored him and he adored me, and he was a deep sea diver and he'd work away a lot, so he'd work away 2 months on, 2 months off, so it wasn't sort of unusual. It didn't hit me that he'd gone, and it was a really bizarre thing. The body was flown back in England, there was the funeral and I didn't go. My brother went, but again they thought protect Lorraine from it. And I didn't go, and it was just like the oddest thing, and nobody ever told me what happened in the accident or anything, and I developed a fear of my mum dying after that stayed with me. I still think it's a little bit with me now, but she's okay. She's 84, she's good, but I'm very protective of my mum and feel I've got to look after my mum. But I did develop in childhood a fear that my mum was going to die because, my stepdad was there one day and gone the next kind of thing. And I never really knew why. And I don't know if it would have been any different if I'd been to the funeral, obviously. But what happened when I was about 35 was a dance friend of mine showed me a picture of his daughter, who was 8 years old. And she was wearing a uniform similar to the one I wore at Malta, like with a boater, and I just looked at this picture, and he said she's 8 years old, and all of a sudden I was in floods of tears because it hit me like a sledgehammer, the loss being at that age, and I thought, my God, if his daughter suddenly lost her dad, she's, you know, he said, oh, she's a real daddy's girl. And it just hit me, and I thought, oh my God, if that girl suddenly lost her daddy, you know, how devastating that is. And all that grief just came pouring out. And I think it was about 35, it was 1974 when he died. So I just thought I'd share that, you know, because I didn't feel the feelings at the time, but, you know, they did just pop out unexpectedly. And then also, speaking to what Rob said and different people have said, is like my real father, I never actually knew him. My mum divorced him when she was expecting me. But I always kind of felt the loss of that. And then when I heard that he died, I remember I stayed in bed all day and just cried all day, just for one day. But it was like the loss of the relationship that we never had, and we never would have. And so yeah, these things they're deep. They're deep, aren't they? But it just feels like really healthy to me to express the emotion around it.
It certainly does, and it's a beautiful example, and especially your father, your grandfather example is a really beautiful. Sorry, was it your stepdad or your
Stepdad?
Yeah, your stepdad. A really, really beautiful example of the way that the system works, because you didn't experience any of that at the time. And then there you are 13 or whatever, many years later, and suddenly unleashes because you're experiencing it then. And you can experience it just as severely and just as deeply and just as traumatically in that moment as you could all those many years ago if you'd have known what was going on. So I think it's a really beautiful example. And by talking about it, we can normalize it, you know that we all experience these things and know that it's okay, and sort of just get it out there.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was as well, I had all these questions that I wanted to know exactly what had happened in the diving accident. You know, I needed to know what had happened, and it was like the elephant in the room in our family. You know, our life just changed overnight. You know, we've moved to Malta, create this new life, and I had questions, and I could never mention anything to my mum or my brother because they was so deeply in grief, you know. So it was like it took all those years for me to be able to have that conversation with my family to actually ask, well, what really happened?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I notice Alfie's put a remark. Alfie says, sometimes I have the most intense experience of grief arise in me and I have no idea what it relates to. So I don't know if anybody else has that feeling or have experienced that. Or if anybody's got any more comments or observations.
On that one, I would just say that it's again, it's evidence that things pass through us. You know, that I think there's such a lot that we have no idea of what's going on. You know, there's such a lot that we pick up on or that we experience, and we cannot necessarily know why we're feeling like that or what's going on, but to be able to just swim in that and know that as it passes through us, we're going to be in the experience, whether we can attach it to something or not, is the beauty of knowing this understanding, isn't it? knowing that we can just be in that intense experience, and that you can have an intense experience of love and not really know why you suddenly feel this overwhelming experience of love. It's the same, isn't it? But the things that we don't like, or we're not so comfortable with, are the ones that we perhaps question more. And I just think it's part of being human, that, well, part of being, what I believe is, you know, spirit living a human life, and we get to experience stuff as human. You know, we're consciousness and we're living a human life, so we get to experience stuff through consciousness that maybe we can't even understand in our own minds, but that's just part of consciousness experiencing itself. Like, consciousness can't experience itself without the human. It doesn't have that ability, so it experiences itself through the human and the human form. You know, this is something that we have to live with. So I think it's really almost beautiful to have that intensity of experience, and know at the heart of it that you're okay, really. And it's when you get trapped in it is when that becomes a dangerous thing, or a harder thing, you know, like Wendy talked about with her sister. When you get trapped in that experience, then it doesn't look like you can come out the other end. It doesn't look like you're okay.
No. I think with all my family, my sister was the sort of, you know, in a way, that the head underneath my parents, and I was kind of her second in command. I was the organizer and things like that. And I just, the caravan thing is bringing my brothers and sisters together. And even you know, we've got a couple of black sheep in the family, as you know, as they're referred to, but I want to bring them in, you know, and give them a chance to be accepted. So, you know, that good thing that's come out. I wonder if it'd be all right. At my dad's funeral, I wrote some words, and they're not terribly sad. If it'd be all right to read them.
Sounds lovely.
So, yeah. So this is what, and it's on. This is what my dad would say to the family, to my brothers and sisters. And so here goes. Cry for me, then cry some more, but in time smile, for I had so much that you gave to me, a large loving family, a wonderful wife, the family parties and get-togethers, going to football matches with my boys. I enjoyed feeding you. I enjoyed giving you a warm home to come to. I enjoyed providing for you all. Miss me, but in time you will smile at the happy times we had, the times we shared together. Say my name often, include me in your conversations. For I'm still listening, I'm still there. I'm only in the next room, waiting for the next family party. And those words, they were right for my family. I'm a Londoner, you know. I'm born in Bow in the East End, and my dad had a big, he had a horse and carriage, big glass one, you know, open one, and the words are right for my family. And I could see, I read them, and I stood and looked at them, and I could see, you know, I think it helped them. Yeah, it's the right words. It was the right ones for them. So yeah, I think with me, with all the funerals, and they've been different, it's I always wanted to just almost say to people, you know, don't give up hope just because someone's gone. You know, there's still so much that we can do. There's still always that little glimmer of light. Just look up in the sky.
Did you have any final words, Christine?
I was going to say, from what you were saying before with the grief coming up, what I found was useful for me was that I split my time between being with other people and being on my own. And when I was on my own and the grief came up, I'd just go with it. You know, I'd put music on that made me cry or whatever, and I'd cry, and I'd almost, you know, sort of let it go through me. And if I did that, it wouldn't stay anywhere near as long as if I tried to think, oh no, I mustn't feel this now, and you know, I've got to block it. And I also felt that doing it on my own, I felt less inhibited to do it than with other people who would want to stop me crying in a way, because that's what people tend to want to do, isn't it? So I wanted to do it on my own and just really feel that. And that for me was a good way of doing it rather than suppressing it.
Does anyone have any final thoughts, comments, questions that they'd like to share? Alfie?
Just came to me really as how in some ways it's like grief is just, I don't know, like the flip side of love, or like love in disguise or something, isn't it? It's almost like right at the bottom of the well of grief. Sometimes there can be like hitting such an intense experience of love or something, like being like you have to go right down there and then find that at the bottom or something.
From a safeguarding point of view, if anybody has been triggered by this conversation, feel free to reach out to any of us to have a conversation, or just say whatever's on your mind.
I just wanted to say thank you to you wonderful ladies as well for this as well, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, girls. That was so beautiful. And I think very, very needed. And we would love to have you back again to see where people are at, maybe in a month or so. And, you know, let's keep having the conversation and opening the space for people to be able to come and talk openly about how they feel. And it's beautiful. Everyone that shared was beautiful. So thank you so much.
I hope it's been okay for everybody. I was, you know, really pondering it, you know, about what should I say, what shouldn't. And then I thought, I've just got to go with the flow, because then it's just not going to be real. And I hope it's been safe and okay for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.